ballroom at Farrow House smelled of hothouse lilies and money, and Dorothea had learned in the 8 months she had served there to tell the difference between the two. The lilies were genuine. They had been driven up from the south in a covered cart and arranged that afternoon by 2 footmen, under Lady Farrow's personal instruction. The money was another matter. She stood at the western margin of the room, where the candlelight did not quite reach her back, near the tall window whose glass held the blue-black of a January night beyond it. Around her the season's first proper assembly moved in its practiced circles, voices lifting and dropping, fans orbiting and stilling, laughter arriving and departing in measured waves. She was not part of it. She had not expected to be. She had been included in the evening's arrangements only because Lady Farrow had wanted her present in the event that the contract papers arrived and required immediate notation. That was what Dorothea was, in this house and in this season. A woman who notated. Her right hand rested inside the pocket of her gray gown, and inside the pocket rested the key. It was a large iron thing, black with age, its shaft worn smooth where some long dead hand had gripped it repeatedly across the years. She had found it 3 weeks before in the old steward's room off the back passage, tucked behind a loose brick in the plaster, 2 feet above the floor, as if someone had meant to hide it in haste and had not returned for it. She had pried the brick free while searching for the household's original land survey, which she needed to cross-reference against a set of letters of credit the Duke of Harfield had provided as proof of his estate's annual yield. The letters did not agree with the survey. The letters did not agree with a great many things. At the far end of the room, the Duke of Harfield laughed at something Lady Farrow had said, and the sound of it reached her even here, warm and easy, a man entirely at home in his own telling of himself. She watched him. She had been watching him, in one form or another, for 6 weeks. She was not yet certain what she was going to do about what she knew. She was a governess, in service, 24 years old, no family left in the world, and the key in her pocket led to a cellar she had not yet opened. She was also the daughter of a solicitor who had taught her to read a column of figures the way another man might read a sentence. And she knew what she had read. The man who stepped into her particular margin of the room arrived quietly, with the stillness of someone accustomed to moving through rooms without announcing himself. He was tall, dressed in a navy coat so precisely fitted it seemed almost structural, and he did not look at the Duke. He looked at her. "You are holding something in your pocket," the man said, his voice low, not unkind. "You have been holding it since the first quarter hour, and you are watching Harfield." She did not startle. She turned to face him, instead, her back straight. "I am watching the room, my lord." He let that pass without comment. He had dark eyes that held very still when he looked at something, and she had the sense, uncomfortable and not entirely unpleasant, that he was looking at her rather than at her reply. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Edmund Ashcroft, Viscount Ravensby." He said it with no expectation of recognition, only as information. "I believe we have not been introduced, Miss Pembridge," she said. "I am Lady Farrow's secretary." He inclined his head. His gaze returned briefly to where the Duke stood. "How long?" he said. "Have you been watching him?" It was not quite a question. She did not answer it that evening. She did not need to. He had already seen the shape of her answer in the fact that she had not deflected it. He took his leave with the same quietness with which he had arrived, and Dorothea stood at the margin of the room a few minutes longer, her hand still closed around the iron key, and felt the particular sensation of being noticed by someone she had not expected to notice her. If you have wondered what brought her to this point, stay a little longer. The answer begins in her father's study, and it ends in a cellar. Dorothea's father had been a solicitor in Bristol, a small man of great exactness who had died of a chest complaint 18 months before and left her nothing but his library and the habit of reading numbers as text. She had taken the first position offered, which was Lady Farrow's household in Berkshire, and she had carried the library with her in 2 trunks and her father's training in her head. It was the training that caused the trouble. Lady Farrow was not a foolish woman, but she was a lonely one, and loneliness Dorothea had observed, made even intelligent people susceptible to the coherence of a story they wished to be true. The Duke of Harfield had arrived in the county in October, bearing letters of introduction from 3 peers of impeccable standing, a reputation for a fortune built on Yorkshire wool and Staffordshire coal, and a manner that was both authoritative and curiously attentive. Lady Farrow had found him interesting. The county had found him satisfying. He confirmed what everyone wanted to believe about the natural relationship between rank and wealth. It was Dorothea's job, in the ordinary course of her duties, to file his letters of credit with the household records. She had done so. She had also, because she could not help it, read them with the portion of her mind her father had spent 20 years developing. The letters were precise and thorough and entirely convincing. They were also in at least 2 particular columns. Impossible. The figures they cited for the Harfield estate's annual yield from Staffordshire coal required a production volume that the coal surveys of that region, which Dorothea had located in the county library at her own expense, had not recorded since 1808. The intervening decline was a matter of documented geological record. Either the Duke's yields had not declined, which was a geological improbability, or the letters were not accurately reporting the yields, which was something else entirely. She had been careful. She had not alarmed anyone. She had simply continued her work, and she had found the old steward's room, and she had found the key. She went to Lady Farrow on a Thursday in November, with her concerns arranged as precisely as she could arrange them, and she laid them out in the small morning room while snow moved against the windows outside and a fire crackled in the grate. She was as careful as she knew how to be. She said only what she could demonstrate. Lady Farrow had listened with a stillness that was not attention, but containment. Then she said, "Miss Pembridge, you are a secretary. This is not your domain, my lady. The figures are publicly verifiable. I can show you the coal surveys." "You can show me," Lady Farrow said, her voice acquiring a particular calibrated quality. "A set of county records you have elected to interpret in the manner most convenient to your conclusion. The Duke of Harfield has been vouched for by Lord Ashbridge, by the Earl of Somerton, and by the Marquis of Crail. Those are not names. One disputes on the basis of a governess who plays at numbers. There it was, then. The room had decided her early, as rooms always did. A secretary who overstepped, a woman whose precision was vanity, a governess playing at a man's domain. She had heard it in Lady Farrow's voice, without Lady Farrow having quite said it aloud. She carried it with her out of the morning room, down the passage, and back to her desk. The Duke was in the passage. She did not know how long he had been there. His face when she saw it was pleasant, and entirely unreadable. He waited until Lady Farrow's door had fully closed before he spoke. "Miss Pembridge," he said, "I believe I have you at a disadvantage." She kept her hands at her sides. She did not speak. "I understand you have been reviewing certain papers." His voice was easy, conversational, the voice of a man describing something that did not concern him. Coal surveys, land records, a rather unusual hobby for a household secretary. He paused. A governess who plays at numbers is a charming thing. Numbers, Miss Pembridge, are only as reliable as the hands that wrote them. And not all hands are as educated as yours. He smiled. I mention it only in the spirit of friendship. You have a position here, a comfortable one. These are uncertain times for a woman without connections. He did not say anything further. He did not need to. He walked past her down the passage with the measured ease of a man who had delivered a message and expected it to land, and she stood in the passage after he had gone and thought quite steadily that she was going to open that cellar. Lord Ravensby did not call on her. He was not in a position to call on her, and she was not in a position to receive him. What happened instead was the kind of meeting the Regency enabled for those who understood its machinery. He was present at 3 subsequent events to which Lady Farrow brought Dorothea, and at each event he found a way to stand near enough to speak without anyone observing that they were speaking. He was precise and deliberate, and he wasted nothing. At the first meeting, he told her what he was looking for, and why he believed it existed. At the second, She told him what she had found in the letters of credit. At the third, she showed him. On a small folded sheet, she passed to him with the methodical casualness of a woman adjusting her gloves the specific columns she had compared against the county surveys. He did not praise her for this. He read the columns with the same still attention he gave to everything, and when he looked up from the paper, his eyes held something that was not quite gratitude, but was related to it. He said, "There is a cellar." "I know," she said. "You have a key." She did not answer, but she did not need to. "The marriage announcement," he said, "is expected before February." 3 weeks, she said. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "I need you to let me accompany you." She looked at him. He looked at her. Around them the room moved and chattered, and did not notice two people deciding something. "Thursday," she said. She did not sleep well on Wednesday night, and on Thursday before dawn she rose and dressed and went to the library on the pretext of retrieving a household ledger she had left there. The library at Faroe House was a long room on the east side of the ground floor, its walls dressed in shelves from floor to the corniced ceiling, its north window facing the frozen kitchen garden. She had brought a candlestick and her father's notation method, and she had spread across the reading table every land record she could access that bore Harfield's name, crest, or correspondence seal. She had been at it for perhaps 40 minutes when she became aware that she was not alone. She did not startle this time, either. She turned, and Lord Ravensby was standing just inside the library door, still in his greatcoat, his hat in his hand, his face in shadow but for the candle on the table between them. He had come early, or she had. It did not matter. He did not enter further. He watched her. She understood after a moment that he had been watching for some time. She did not know what he had seen. She knew what she had been doing. She had been sitting with her back straight and her candle close, and her father's small brass ruler laid along the columns to keep her eye from drifting, moving through the records with a methodical patience she had been taught at 10 years old. She had been talking to herself in the way she did when she worked alone, not aloud, but in the small internal running notation she had inherited from her father, a quiet enumeration of what matched and what did not, and what the gap between them meant. It was not a dramatic thing to witness. She was a woman, with ink on her forefinger, in a gray gown that had been put on in the dark, reading numbers at a library table before the household woke. She could not imagine what expression she had worn. She thought it was probably the expression her father had described as the face she made when something did not add up, which he had said was like watching a person quietly refuse to be deceived. Lord Ravensby crossed the room without hurrying and stood on the other side of the table and looked at what she had done. He did not say anything for a long moment. She did not look at him directly. She felt in the particular way her body had begun to register his proximity that he was looking at her before he looked at the records, and that the two things were not quite separate. The records were arranged before her in 3 groups. There were the letters Harfield had provided, the county land survey she had obtained independently, and a third set, which was the household's original conveyance documents going back to the previous owner of Faroe's neighboring estate. Documents that bore Harfield's grandfather's name in the margins and told a different story of the family's holdings than the Duke's own letters told. She had separated them and cross-referenced them and noted the discrepancies in a column, so clean her father would have approved of the hand. Lord Ravensby crossed the room without hurrying, and stood on the other side of the table and looked at what she had done. He did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "You went back to the grandfather. The letters claim the fortune is inherited. If it is inherited, there is a record of the original estate's yield. The grandfather's estate generated £800 annually from the Staffordshire holding in 1791. The Duke's letters claim 11,000 annually from the same holding in 1818. He was very still. He said the geological decline accounts for perhaps a third of the gap. Yes, she said. The rest is invented. He sat down on the opposite chair and put his hat on the table and looked at the records for a long time. She let him look. She understood the particular texture of a man doing arithmetic in his head. She had grown up watching it. After a while, he said, "My brother invested £8,000 in a Harfield scheme in 1815. Harfield told him it was a Yorkshire wool venture. The prospectus showed yields that would have tripled Arthur's capital in 3 years. He paused. The candle between them moved in a small draught from the window. The scheme collapsed in 1817. Harfield characterized it publicly as Arthur's mismanagement. Arthur had no defense to offer because the documents he had signed under Harfield's instruction made it appear as though he had directed the scheme's investment choices. Himself, he did not direct them. He had signed what he was told to sign. He stopped. He was found in his rooms in January of 1817. He had been dead for 2 days before anyone thought to look. Dorothea was very quiet. She did not offer consolation. She understood from her father, and from the kind of grief that does not want consolation so much as it wants a witness, that the right response was to receive this with full attention and not to diminish it by filling the silence too quickly. She said, "I am sorry," and she meant it with the whole of what she was. He looked at her across the candlelit table, and something in his face changed very slightly, as though a small pressure behind it had shifted without yet releasing. He said, "I have been trying to find what is in that cellar for 3 years. Then we should go," she said, "before the household wakes." The cellar door was set into the inner wall of the old wine room, behind a rack of bottles that had not been moved in years. The rack was heavy, and she helped him shift it. Working in near silence, the candle left outside the wine room and a dark lantern they had brought between them, throwing a moving circle of light across the stone floor. The door's lock was old but sound, and the key turned in it with the particular smoothness of iron that had been made to last. The door swung inward, and the smell that came out was cold and particular. Paper, damp stone, something that had been sealed and kept for a long time. Inside, there were 4 shelves of ledgers, bound in black cloth, dated and labeled in a clear professional hand. There were also a set of tin boxes, whose lids were stamped with the name of a London bank that Dorothea recognized from her father's correspondence as one that had suspended its operations in 1816 under circumstances that had never been fully explained. There were also in a leather document sleeve 27 individual sheets of paper whose content she understood within 2 minutes of reading. They were original bank draft authorizations. They were signed with the name of the Duke of Harfield. They authorized transfers from an investment account that was itself a construction, a layered fiction built of cross-referenced letters, and invented signatories that had never held real capital. The capital that investors like Arthur Ashcroft had placed into it had been drawn out in a series of smaller transfers to an account held under a different name. Entirely, a name Dorothea did not recognize, but Lord Ravensby at her shoulder, reading over her in the close dark of the cellar, stiffened at immediately. "That is Graves," he said. "That is Harfield's solicitor." She looked at him. His face in the lantern light was controlled, the jaw set, the eyes very still. She had seen that stillness before, and understood now that it was not coldness, had never been coldness. It was the precise management of a feeling so large that loosing it entirely would have made a kind of wreckage. "We cannot take these," she said. "If we remove them and are seen, they can be characterized as stolen. We need a witness to the discovery." He was already thinking. She could see it. He said, "There is a man in Newbury. A King's Bench solicitor, not a county man. He was my brother's solicitor before Harfield's scheme. He has been waiting for this for 3 years. He paused. "I need 2 days. She looked at the ledgers. She locked the cellar and pocketed the key, and let him shift the bottle rack back into its place. And she carried the key out of Farrow House with her into the cold January morning, and she did not return it to its hiding place. She put it around her neck, on a thread, under her collar, where it rested against her sternum, with a weight that was not unpleasant. It was evidence. It was also, she understood now, The thing that had connected her to Edmund Ashcroft in the dark of a cellar, and she did not examine that thought too carefully, but she did not dismiss it, either. She had a single day and a half before the world came apart. It was Graves who moved first. Graves had not survived 18 years in the Duke's employment by being careless, and he had not been careless now. He had noted her in the passage that November. He had reported her interest in the county coal surveys to the Duke. He had kept a watch, as careful men in difficult positions do, on everything that might threaten the architecture he had spent those 18 years helping to construct. And on Friday morning he arrived at Farrow House under the pretext of delivering correspondence, spoke for 12 minutes with the Duke in the front sitting room, and then went with the Duke to Lady Farrow. Dorothea did not know what was said in that room. She knew the result. At 11 o'clock, a footman came to her desk and told her Lady Farrow wished to see her, and Lady Farrow's face, when she entered the sitting room, had the particular quality of a woman who has been given a story she wishes to believe and has chosen to believe it. The Duke was present. Graves stood near the window, spare and spectacled and precise, his ink-stained hands folded. "Miss Pembridge," Lady Farrow said, "it has come to my attention that you have been spreading certain allegations regarding the Duke's finances to other members of the household, to outside parties." Without my knowledge or permission, she kept her back straight. She said, "My lady, I have spoken of what I found in the household's own records to one person who had a legitimate concern." A legitimate concern? Lady Farrow's voice had that calibrated quality again. "You are describing yourself as a person competent to judge what is legitimate regarding a Duke of the realm." She paused. "I think you have misunderstood your position here." The Duke said nothing. He did not need to. He stood to one side with his hands behind his back, and an expression of measured regret, as if he were observing a small domestic difficulty he had done nothing to cause. Graves said from his position by the window, "The Viscount Ravensby's interest in this household is a matter of some concern as well. A governess who plays at numbers is one thing. A governess who carries information to Ravensby is rather another. Wah." He said it quietly, to no one in particular, but it landed on Dorothea's sternum like a stone, because she understood immediately that Graves had been watching, and that he had seen her speak to Edmund, and that he was telling the Duke this now, in her presence. Lady Farrow dismissed her from her position that afternoon. She was given until the following morning to remove her belongings. She was told she would receive no character reference. She sat in her small room above the kitchen passage and understood that she was 24 years old with 2 trunks of books, £8 and 11 shillings in her possession, no position, and a key around her neck. She had sent Edmund a note through the kitchen boy at 10 o'clock before the summons to Lady Farrow's sitting room. She did not know if it had arrived. She sat in her room as the afternoon darkened and listened to the house settle around her, and thought about her father, who had told her, near the end, that a figure only held power when someone refused to look at it. She had looked. The knock at her door came at 8:30 that evening, carried by a housemaid with a folded note, and the look of a person doing something she had not been instructed to do, but had decided to do anyway. The note said, in his precise hand, that she was to come tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, and to bring the key, and not to go before. She slept without meaning to, seated in the chair by her window, and woke at 6 to ice on the inside of the glass, and the particular blue silence of a January dawn. The engagement breakfast was held at Harfield House, 10 miles from Farrow, in the long dining room that Lord Ravensby had described to her on their second meeting as the room where the Duke performed his own solvency for guests. She had not been invited. She arrived with Lord Ravensby in his carriage, and with a man named Mr. Garfield Wicks of Wicks and Palmer, King's Bench Solicitors, Newbury. A small tidy man who carried a leather case and who had spoken barely 40 words in the 10 miles of the journey, but whose presence beside her in the carriage felt, Dorothea thought, like the particular weight of 3 years finally moving. The dining room held 43 people. They were seated at a long table dressed with white linen and winter greenery, candelabras lit at intervals against the gray January morning. The assembly in their formal wear, the Duke at the head, Lady Farrow to his right. Her face the careful face of a woman performing happiness she was working to feel. The engagement was to be formally announced at the conclusion of the breakfast. A vicar was present. A solicitor from the county sat to the Duke's left. They entered from the main door, which a footman opened because Mr. Gay. Wicks presented his card with the authority of a man who understood that a card could open doors, a fist could not. The conversation stopped in the uneven way that large rooms stop, table by table, face by face, until 43 people were looking at the door. Lord Ravensby did not hurry. He crossed the room with the precise economy of a man who had measured it in advance, and Dorothea walked beside him and Mr. Sard. Wicks followed, and the room's silence, by the time they reached the table's end, was the particular silence of people who understand that something is happening that they are going to need to understand. The Duke's face had changed. It was a small change, a compression around the eyes. But Dorothea had been watching him for 6 weeks, and she recognized it. It was the face of a man seeing the architecture of his own construction and understanding, for the first time that someone else had seen it too. Lord Ravensby put his hand on the back of an empty chair at the table's end and did not sit. He said to the room, not to any one person, "I apologize for the interruption to the occasion." He spoke in the level declarative manner she had come to know, without volume, without heat, each word placed where it needed to land. "I am obliged to inform this company that the cellar at Farrow House, accessed yesterday afternoon under the supervision of Mr. Wicks and in the presence of 2 additional witnesses, contained a set of ledgers and original bank authorizations representing the Duke of Harfield's financial operations since 1812. Mr. Wicks has examined these documents. They have been retained as legal evidence under his care." He paused for the space of a single breath. "Mar. They document the systematic fabrication of the Duke's estate income across a period of 6 years, including the construction of a fictitious investment scheme in which a number of gentlemen lost genuine capital. My brother was among them." The room was absolutely still. Dorothea stood a half-step behind and to his right and watched 43 faces do the calculation that rooms do when the story they have been living inside rearranges itself. Lady Farrow's hand had gone to her throat. The county solicitor to the Duke's left had risen from his chair. She had not known, until she stood in that room, how much she had been carrying. The weight of the past 6 weeks sat across her shoulders with a precision she had not previously measured, because she had been too occupied with the next step and the step after that to account for the sum. Now she accounted for it. She felt it in the steadiness of her breath, in the particular quality of her own stillness. She had not been wrong. The figures had not deceived her. Her father had given her one reliable instrument, and she had used it correctly. And the room in front of her was slowly, audibly, rearranging itself around that fact. Graves, who was present at the far end of the table, had not moved at all. He was a man who had survived 18 years by never moving first. The Duke said, "This is slander of the vilest kind. This woman is a dismissed servant. She has fabricated these claims in concert with Ravensby, who has a documented personal grievance, and I will see you both before the magistrate, before the week is out." Lord Ravensby looked at him for a moment without speaking. Then he said, "The Duke owes Lady Farrow everything he nearly stole." He said it quietly, in exactly the same register he had used to address the room, without triumph, without cruelty. And he said it once, and did not repeat it. Lady Farrow made a sound that was not quite a word. She was looking at the Duke, with the face of a woman whose story is rewriting itself behind her eyes, which is the most painful kind of rewriting and the most necessary. The county solicitor had placed his hand on his own leather case. The vicar had quietly removed his stole and folded it on the table in front of him with the precise resignation of a man who understood that his professional function at this gathering was no longer required. "Mr. Cellar," Wicks said to the room in general, "the documents will be made available to the relevant authorities. Infor. Any person who believes they may have a claim regarding the Harfield investment scheme of 1815 should contact my office in Newbury, at their earliest convenience. The Duke stood. He was still the Duke, and he was still large. And the room was still a room where rank had always functioned, and for one moment the architecture tried to hold. Then the county solicitor sat down again, at a deliberate remove from where the Duke stood. And the vicar produced a pen and began noting something in a small book, and three of the gentlemen nearest the Duke's end of the table shifted, in the almost unconscious way of men recalibrating a social position, slightly back in their chairs. The Duke's solicitor did not look at him. The architecture did not hold. Graves left the room before anyone moved to stop him. Lord Ravensby had expected this. There was, as Dorothea discovered later, a King's Bench officer waiting in the hall. She did not watch the Duke leave. She watched Lady Farrow, who sat very still at the end of the long table for a long time, her hands flat on the white linen, and then reached out and very deliberately extinguished the nearest candelabra's 3 flames with a small silver snuffer, one by one, with the controlled precision of a woman who was going to be all right and who needed to do something with her hands. If you have wondered what she did with the key, come a little further. Spring came to Berkshire in the usual way, tentatively, and then all at once, and the county had other things to talk about by April. Mr. Wicks's case proceeded with the methodical patience of the legal machinery, and 3 gentlemen who had lost capital in 1815 came forward, and the Duke of Harfield spent March in a solicitor's office in London, being questioned by men who read figures the way Dorothea did, and did not find the experience comfortable. Lady Farrow declined to speak publicly about any of it, which was her right, and retained Dorothea's references with an addendum that was, all things considered, warmer than it needed to be. Ravensby had asked her on the carriage ride back from Harfield House in January whether she had a position to return to. She had said that she did not. He had said, after a long moment, during which the winter landscape moved past the carriage window, and Mr. Juror saws. Wicks dozed in his corner with the satisfaction of a man whose 3-year-old debt to a dead client was being repaid. I have a library that requires a cataloging system. It has not been properly organized in 12 years. My housekeeper tells me it is a disgrace, she said. I do not require charity, my lord. I know that, he said. I am not offering it. I'm offering you a position that requires the specific ability to look at a column of figures and tell me what they actually mean, applied to a library that has accumulated 12 years of disorganized acquisition. It is not a governess position. I do not know precisely what to call it. You are welcome to name it yourself. She had looked at him across the carriage's interior. He had looked back, and his face was the same controlled face it had always been, except that there was something in it now that she had not been able to read clearly in the cellar or in the library, and could not read clearly now, but which her body understood before her mind permitted the word. He was not offering her a cataloging position. He was offering her a beginning of something that neither of them had the period's vocabulary to name yet, and he was being careful about it because she was a woman without a reference who deserved careful. She said, I would require a full household wage, not a secretary's reduced rate. Agreed, he said. She said, and access to the library at all hours. The library, he said, is why I am asking you. She did not smile. Her mouth did something, a slight compression that was not quite a smile, and he noticed it with the same quality of attention he had given everything else, and she thought, inside her own careful chest, that being noticed precisely was not the same as being noticed only. She had been noticed precisely by this man, and she had noticed him in return, and the two things were occupying the same small interior space and had been doing so since the cellar, and she was going to have to do something about that eventually. The study at Ravensby was on the south side of the house, a room of good dimensions, with 2 windows facing the kitchen, garden, and a fireplace of painted stone with a wide mantelpiece. She had been in the house 3 weeks, when she thought of the key. She took it from around her neck, where she had worn it since January, and she held it in her palm for a moment in the morning light. It was black iron, heavy, worn smooth at the shaft, The kind of object that had been made to last longer than whatever it had been made to protect. Her father had believed that objects carried a residue of their function. She did not precisely share that belief, but she understood what this one had done, and she thought it deserved to be somewhere it could be seen rather than somewhere it could be lost. She went to the study and stood before the fireplace. She found a nail already set in the mantelpiece's inner edge, as if something had hung there before and had been removed. She hung the key. She stepped back and looked at it. It hung there in the morning light, black against the pale painted stone, and it looked exactly like what it was. A thing that had opened something. She was standing that way, still looking, when she heard his step in the doorway. She did not turn immediately. She said, "I have put the key on your mantelpiece. I hope that is not presumptuous." He was quiet for a moment. She heard him cross the room, and then he was beside her, looking at the key. His arm was close enough that she felt the warmth of it. He said no. He said it in the low-level voice she had come to know. And it landed the way his words always landed, precise and without waste. He put his hand, not his gloved hand but his bare hand, over hers where it rested at her side, and she felt it the way she had learned to feel everything with him. In the body first, specific and certain. A warmth at her wrist that traveled upward, and her breath altered without her deciding to alter it, and she thought that her father had been right about objects, that they did carry residue, and that the key on the mantelpiece would always be the thing that had opened the cellar. It would also be something else. It would be the morning she had stopped watching from the margins. She turned her hand over under his, and their fingers settled together, and the fire crackled in the grate behind them, throwing its warmth against the backs of their legs. And outside the kitchen garden was coming green under an April sun that was warmer than it had any right to be for the time of year, and the room was very quiet. And it was enough. He said quietly, "Dorothea," she said. "Yes." He did not say anything further for a moment. Then he said, "I think, if you are willing, that we should speak to a vicar." She thought of the vicar at Harfield House, who had folded his stole and put away his pen. She thought it was a fine thing that there were other vicars in other counties, on ordinary spring mornings, waiting to do the work they had been trained to do. "Yes," she said, "I think so too. If this story held something that mattered to you, leave a word about what it was. These small acts of witness carry further than they seem." The key hung above the fire at Ravensby for many years, black, against the pale stone. It was never taken down. Visitors occasionally asked about it, and the answer they received was always the same, given in the same quiet voice, as if the telling of it had found its final form. It was a key to a cellar in Berkshire, and it had opened something rather more important than a door.